With the Royal Rumble in our rearview mirrors, and goodness me, wasn't that just the bleakest little snapshot of the WWE product as a whole, it can mean only one thing: we're on the way to WrestleMania! Cue a lot of people pointing at the sign, and that sign hopefully not bursting into flames this time. Some matches on the Mania 38 card seem to be locked in: Reigns versus Lesnar, Rousey versus Flair, but others are still very much liquid. Apparently WWE has currently no idea who's fighting for the WWE Championship, for instance. That's fun. As we prepare ourselves for a deluge of reports about plans coming into place, those plans being scrapped, new plans coming into place, and those plans being jettisoned into space, let's look at some of the biggest matches proposed for the show of shows that never ended up hitting our screens, for worse, or in some cases, for much, much better. I'm Adam, hailing from partsFUNknown, and here are 10 biggest cancelled WrestleMania matches. And you know what you shouldn't cancel? Your subscription to partsFUNknown. Have you subscribed to partsFUNknown? No? Well, cancel that by subscribing to partsFUNknown. Number 10, the many cancellations of Shawn Michaels. Let's start with Mr. WrestleMania, the achy breaky kid, Shawn Michaels. He's still probably got the best WrestleMania resume in history, including some all-time greats like his match with Taker at 25, Angle at 21, Flair at 24, Cena at 23, all amazing, but we were robbed of two matches that could have reached similar heights, once by ego and once by fate. Famously, the main event of Mania 13, 1 year after Michaels beat Hart in a hugely overrated Iron Man match, was to be Hitman Michaels 2, but Shawn didn't want to do business, exaggerated a knee injury, and showed those plans his proverbial hick and bottom. Second up in 2006 at WrestleMania 22, when he ended up wrestling Vince in an enjoyable plunder match, Shawn was actually originally penciled to wrestle none other than Latino Heat Eddie Guerrero. In November 2005, the creative team pitched the match to Michaels, who agreed, enticed by the story of two super performers who'd worked to put their personal demons behind them. Sadly, November 2005 would also be the month that Eddie Guerrero tragically died of heart failure. Number 9, triples under threat. Turns out triple threats make pretty good main events at WrestleMania. Triple H, Michaels, Benoit, Bryan, Batista, Orton, Rousey, Lynch, Flair, Reigns, Bryan, Edge, all great, and all, as coincidence would have it, byproducts of original Mania plans falling by the wayside. However, that list is absent two three-ways that otherwise could have closed a show, one at Mania 15, the other, famously, at Mania 29. According to Vince Russo, WrestleMania 15, a pretty damn bad WrestleMania at that, the main event was supposed to be Steve Austin versus The Rock versus Mick Foley, as a thank you for all the hard work Foley had done for the company in the past year, including the amateur brain surgery performed on him at the Royal Rumble. Austin, allegedly under the influence of Shawn Michaels, requested a one-on-one match with The Rock instead. Speaking of the People's Champ, in 2016, The Rock stated in an interview promoting Jumanji that the original plans for what would become the notoriously arse twice in a lifetime was a triple threat: Rock versus Cena versus CM Punk, as revealed on that podcast with Colt Cabana. Sadly, neither match came to be, and two unconventional looking workhorses shuffled down the card while two air quotes bigger stars took the spotlight. Number 8, pretty much all of WrestleMania 30, aka the WrestleMania where the fans took control of the lighting desk and put the spotlight exactly where it belonged. The build to WrestleMania 30 was nothing like what the WWE creative team originally planned, with at least 4 matches being wildly different on the night. First up, Daniel Bryan was booked to fight Sheamus, but we said no thank you. CM Punk was booked to go over Triple H, but CM Punk said no thank you. The Rock was supposed to wrestle Brock Lesnar, but the previous year's groin-tearing crap extravaganza put paid to that, and the main event was supposed to be Old Evolution Implode, and genuinely fans couldn't sigh loud enough at the prospect of that. What ended up happening was a show held together with sticky tape, cobbled together from basically what the fans wanted to see, and lo and behold, WrestleMania 30 is one of the greatest WrestleManias of all time. Number 7, Triple H gets his gloves on. Triple H has a terrible record at WrestleMania, matched only by Shawn Michaels with how many times he's lost on the grand stage of them all. He's also, as one of the big dub's most tenured athletes, seen his fair share of changed WrestleMania plans. At WrestleMania 18, he wrestled Chris Jericho in an infamously underwhelming match, had no business going on after Rock Hogan. In fact, the original plan was a bit more turbocharged, with face Triple H set to take on heel Steve Austin for the big belt, with none other than Bret Hart as the special guest referee in exchange for being able to use WWE photos for his autobiography. Those plans fell apart after Austin lobbied to turn face after the invasion angle ended, and Hart didn't want it to appear like he'd forgiven WWE for the screw job and pulled the plug on his own involvement. Even bigger and sillier than that idea, though, Show was Triple H's original dance partners for Mania X7 the year before. The first plan was Triple H versus Shawn Michaels, but HBK turned up to an episode of Raw on pills and was immediately sent home, so that was out. In crisis mode, Trips pitched a backup plan, Triple H versus Mike Tyson in a boxing match, harkening back to Roddy Piper's famous bout with Mr. T at Mania 2. Sadly, or perhaps for the good of us all, WWE and Tyson couldn't agree on money and Triple H faced Taker instead. But speaking of boxing, number 6, Mayweather versus De La Hoya. People really like boxing, something I can't understand. Their gloves look so silly, and those trunks aren't nearly tight enough for combat sports. However, WWE took great interest in the fact that in 2007, Floyd Mayweather vs. Oscar De La Hoya did over 2 million buys on pay-per-view, the most in history at the time. As such, WWE campaigned to bring both men in for WrestleMania 24, with the original idea being Mayweather teaming up with Shane McMahon, makes sense, he's got the best working punches in all of WWE after all, to take on the team of Rey Mysterio and Oscar De La Hoya, because apparently Mysterio is WWE's cultural liaison to all Latin American prize fighters. When De La Hoya refused, citing a lack of interest in wrestling, the plans were changed to Mayweather and Mysterio versus Shane and Big Show, before finally being changed to just Mayweather versus Big Show, which is still remembered as one of the best celebrity wrestling matches to not feature Snooki. And speaking of Big Show, number 5, Big Show versus Shaq, a tale as old as time. Poor Big Show, he really wanted to wrestle Shaquille O'Neal, you guys. Like, he saved up all of his pocket money, he's been good all year, and a super duper promise, but sadly, he's never had the chance, with Show's dream of Giant versus Giant being crushed at multiple Manias. The match was originally scheduled for WrestleMania 28, with Shaq even publicly announcing the match months ahead of time. Never came to be, but after the two men came face to face during the Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal at Mania 32, once again, plans were put in place for Big Show versus Shaq at Mania 33. O'Neal blames WWE for messing the match up that time, saying they started with it being one-on-one, then WWE changed it to a 6-man tag before cancelling it. Doesn't sound like the WWE we all know and love, right? And that led to a salty Shaquille turning WWE down when they approached him, saying, actually, we do want the match after all. And all the while, Big Show was just getting in the best shape of his life for a match that never ended up happening. Poor Big Show. As of right now, both men have performed for AEW, and both men apparently still want the fight, but it still hasn't come to pass. No happiness for the Big Show ever. Number 4, Battle of the Billionaires. No happiness for the Big Show ever. Until WrestleMania 28's buy rates went supernova off the back of Rock vs. Cena, the most bought WWE show in history was WrestleMania 23, due in no small part to the Battle of the Billionaires, Vince and Donald Trump putting their unconvincing hair up for grabs in a match between their champions Umaga and Bobby Lashley. However, the match was almost very different, with neither Umaga or Bobbles being penciled. Instead, those honors went to Big Show as Vince McMahon's champion and Hulk Hogan as Trump's. Makes sense, they're both stupidly coiffured Gordian Palumpas with troubling views on racial politics, KISSING. Can't wait to see if that stays in the edit. The idea was that Hogan would body slam Big Show in a Wish.com remake of Hogan body slamming Andre to seal victory for Trump. However, those plans would fall apart in the wake of Hogan and McMahon having a massive lovers tiff about Hogan's fee, resulting in neither man talking to each other for over a year, which means Show was out and Umaga and Lashley were in. Poor Big Show. Number 3, Lex Luger WWE Champion, aka that time Vince booked the main event of WrestleMania by holding a live audience poll, except the audience didn't realize they were voting at the time. The finish to the 1994 Royal Rumble saw Bret Hart and Lex Luger go over the top rope at the same time, with their feet touching the ground at air quotes, the same time, which led to a spot of refs raising both Luger and Hart's arms in victory in turn. The reason for this was Vince had previously wanted Luger to become the new Hulk Hogan, even promising him after SummerSlam 93 that Luger would be coronated at Mania 10. However, in the meantime, Bret Hart had surged in popularity and his workhorse professionalism had earned him the support of the locker room. Caught between a Lunk and a Hart place, Vince decided to let the Rumble crowd decide who would get the belt at Mania, and the crowd decisively cheered for Bret louder than they did for Luger. Poor Lex Luger, and also poor Big Show. Number 2, many more Hogan things. Considering that for the first 10 years of its existence, every WrestleMania was built around Hulk Hogan, it makes sense that he has seen a litany of ideas rise and fall ahead of the biggest show of the year. There are bloody loads of them, so we'll just present you with a few choice cuts. First up, Hogan was set to face Zeus one-on-one at WrestleMania 6, but that fell apart when the Zeus vehicle No Holds Barred flopped at the box office. At Mania 7, he was supposed to face Ultimate Warrior again before the Gulf War air quotes inspired Vince to have Hogan go after an Iraqi sympathizer. That was originally going to be Sheik Tugboat before Sergeant Slaughter took his place. Just let that sink in. Sheik Tugboat. The next year at Mania 8, Hogan was originally booked to fight and beat Ric Flair in a dream match that got pulled because after the steroid scandal, Hogan suddenly needed to not be around for a bit. And finally, perhaps the biggest of all, at WrestleMania 25, Hogan was, at least according to the Hulkster himself, so take it with a pinch of salt, scheduled to have a dream match with John Cena before Hogan went down after having back surgery and the match was shelved. Hogan versus Cena in 2009 would have been a train wreck. And number 1, Undertaker. Just loads. Of course, it makes sense to end this list talking about the man perhaps most closely associated with the granddaddy of them all, the granddaddy's granddaddy, Lemony Wicket, and the series of unfortunate main events, The Undertaker. So many plans have changed for the dead man over the years. He was originally supposed to face Sting at WrestleMania 27, but the Icon refused. Was supposed to face Cena at WrestleMania 32, but Big Match John got Big Match hurt, and they brought in the boss's son, but not before considering running Taker versus Strowman. And that's not even taking into account all the times where Taker was booked to have his streak broken, but the company switched out at the 11th hour. On the list of people earmarked to make the streak rest in peace are Kurt Angle at Mania 22, but Kurt refused. Mark Henry, for some reason, at Mania 23 in their casket match. Wade Barrett at WrestleMania 27, the same Mania that WWE also wanted Taker to face Sting, the same Mania that WWE also tried to get Brock Lesnar back for during his UFC heyday. And finally, weirdest of all, Ted DiBiase Jr., who Vince was once so high on, he considered him to be the next Randy Orton and wanted to cement his rise by conquering The Undertaker, the very man that his dad, the $1 Million Man, had brought into the company. None of these plans ended up taking place, and you know what? Bloody good thing too. And that's our list. What WrestleMania match that almost happened would you have most wanted to see? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like and share this video around if you enjoyed it. Make sure you subscribe to PartsFUNknown for more silly wrestling content, and never forget to jam that jam.